Hello everybody, Larry Young here again with another segment of OLaMan, Living Life with Purity. And we've got Alex Fiato back in the studio again today. Say hello, Alex.
Good to be with you, Alex.
Oh, good to be with you too, Larry. Anyway, let me start by saying I'm going to go back and revisit a segment I did the other day on the decline of nations. And Alex, as I promised you, is going to do a deep dive into the book written by Archbishop John Knoll. He did this, I think, before he became an archbishop. He was still just the bishop of Fort Wayne, South Bend. 1940 was when this book was put out. But he talked about how the moral decay leads to the fall and the decline of nations. And he also then offers a general therapy or cure for how to deal with this. And it deals with our spirit, our spiritual life. So that being said, I want to sort of go into a little more background, a little topical review on things. And this comes from an article written in 2016 by Monsignor Charles Pope, P-O-P-E. I don't know if that's indicative of anything here, but this comes from the Pope, I guess we could say, right?
No.
Can we say this comes from the Pope?
The head Cardinal Pope.
No, he was just a Monsignor.
With the last name of Pope.
Right. Well, he's a Pope. He's a Pope. He's as good as the one we...
He's more Pope than the Pope.
He's probably about as good as the one we got right now, so let's go with it. But anyway, Monsignor Pope was talking about in 2016, he referenced an article that was put out by a fellow by the name of Alexander Tyler of the University of Edinburgh. That's over in Scotland. And this Alexander Tyler noted 8 stages that articulate what history discloses about how nations fall and what leads to these transformations in great civilizations. And so there's 8 stages. I'm going to read through each of these to try to set a basis, a tone.
Or set the stage. 8 stages
We're going to set the stage. We're going to combine 8 stages into one larger stage. Okay. Thank you, Alex. Incredible insight.
That's why I'm here.
Okay, go back to your reading. So, hey, I think there's some M&Ms in your left pocket. So
okay,
go ahead and help yourself. So the first stage is bondage, and bondage leads to spiritual growth. And let me tell you why. So he writes, great civilizations are formed in the crucible. The ancient Jews were in bondage for 400 years in Egypt. The Christian faith and the church came out of 300 years of persecution. Western Christendom emerged from the chaotic conflicts during the decline of the Roman Empire and the movements of often fierce barbarian tribes, the Mongol invaders, and things like that. American culture was formed by the injustices that grew in colonial times. Sufferings and injustices cause, even force, spiritual growth. Suffering brings wisdom and demands a spiritual discipline that seeks justice and solutions. So, to paraphrase that, when you're imprisoned by thoughts or ideas, or feeling in bondage, you seek relief, and you're not being able to get it from your brother or brother man next to you, so you seek a higher power to come and help you, and that's where prayer comes into play. And even if you haven't learned how to pray, you know how to beg for help, from something that may not be there.
Sure, in extreme
I mean, even
stress.
an animal will howl out, in pain if it's in distress, not knowing who's going to help it, but it's letting folks know, hey, I'm in trouble, help me, type of thing. Babies cry for these types of things.
That's right, yeah.
So this is a form of spiritual growth and outreaching, so that comes with that. So maybe babies crying isn't really a form of prayer, but it's a plea for help. So from the spiritual growth comes great courage. Having been steeled in the crucible of suffering, courage and the ability to endure great sacrifice come forth. Anointed leaders emerge, and people are summoned to courage and sacrifice, including the loss of their own lives, in order to create a better, more just world for succeeding generations. People who have little or nothing also have little or nothing to lose and are often more willing to live for something more important than themselves and their own pleasure. A battle is begun, a battle requiring courage, discipline, and other virtues. So this is partly one of the reasons why when wars are fought, they're not fought by the wealthy. They're not fought by the privileged. They're led by that. And they tell the people without resources and without possessions and without, great wealth or capacity to go get them, guys, while they go back to the canteen, and wait it out and see what comes back from the field. So that's how these things go. So people who have really nothing to lose and the most to gain are the ones who are going to fight the fiercest. And because they're fighting not for themselves so much, but for their women and children back home. Because they know that if they don't stop this, they're going to be slaughtered. So that's an innate human, I think, response,
Sure,
which bring these things.
Protect your family at times.
If you regard that, if you have regard for your family.
Yeah, and the Roman legions did their best fighting when they would leave their families after they planted. They'd go out, they'd fight the wars, and then they would come back, and they would harvest.
Right.
But they were engaged in, they were told that the empire, in order to protect your family, these Germanic tribes need to be...
Right. But the key source was the obligation to family.
Correct.
Okay, and love of family. But
Which is the basic building block of any civilization.
But I'm going to get into that. That's also being destroyed in our current culture right now, the regard for family.
Oh my God.
It's so
probably worse than any time in the
well,
history.
we're going to come back to that, but I wanted to kind of leave that out there, sort of a dangling participle, because that's a key element here of how these cycles have repeated themselves throughout the centuries. So the battle has begun, requiring courage, discipline, and other virtues. So from the courage comes liberty. So as a result of our courageous fights in the field, the foe is vanquished and liberty and greater justice emerges. So the peace kind of comes upon the field, and the antagonism is gone, and people are free to be. At this point, a civilization comes forth rooted in its greatest ideals, which are family, the courage, and honoring the sacrifices of their forefathers who died on those battlefields to preserve the dignity and your own freedoms for you and the women and children back home and others who were the survivors. So many who led the battle are still alive, and they come back, and the legacy of those who are not is still fresh. So they're still remembering their compatriots who died on the battlefield, and they honor them, and they cherish them, and they thank them for their sacrifice by not yielding and staying in their own place to preserve this liberty that was just won. So they fight for their liberty. Liberty isn't free. You have to continue to fight for it. So heroism and the virtues that brought about liberty are still esteemed. The ideals that were struggled for during the years in the crucible are still largely agreed upon. So people are still, at this point, when they've obtained liberty, they're still thankful for how they got there. They're still mindful of these things. They're not forgetting it because it's important, because this is who they are. And they don't need to be reminded of it so much because they're living it, because they still feel it. Okay, so that passion hasn't left them. Okay, so now we have liberty. And after liberty comes abundance. Liberty ushers in greater prosperity because a civilization is still functioning with the virtues of sacrifice and hard work. But then comes the first danger, abundance. Things that are in too great an abundance tend to weigh us down and take on a life of their own. Did anyone ever read On Walden Pond, by Henry Thoreau? When he talked about how man becomes a slave to his possessions. It's very true. It was right then and it's right now. So that's one of the reasons I say be careful and simplify your lives and try to not weigh yourself down by things that are unnecessary. This is an inclination I've been getting from the Blessed Mother for some time now, and it's a hard thing to take on in our lives because we want to be comfortable, but we have to be careful about how many comforts we take on and how dependent we become upon them. So these abundances start to weigh us down. And at the same time, the struggles that engender wisdom and steel the soul to proper discipline and priorities move to the background. So as your need to take care of all these possessions that you have start to weigh you down, you've got to clean this, you got to take care of that, a boat, I got to do these things, I got to do all these things that are practically, maybe unnecessary in your life, but important to you. Start putting your other thinking and your ideals to the background. You start pushing it to the back, say, I'll take care of that later. So Jesus said that man's life does not consist in his possessions. This is why he said to not be rich and not accumulate things, but to be, not, in poverty, but to kind of live on that edge of poverty. Don't live for your possessions, because all it's going to do is take you down. But just try to tell that to people in a culture that starts to experience abundance. Such a culture is living on the fumes of earlier sacrifices. That's really important. That thing right there. They're living on the fumes, not the substance of it, but they're just getting a whiff of this because it's getting further and further away. They're not actually seeing the source of these things, but they can still have this presence of this, and just in the form of a fume.
Now take a look at our poor in the United States: air conditioning, subsidies, food stamps.
Our poor have iPhones.
iPhone.
Right, $1,000 iPhone.
They live better than the kings, right?
Well, they eat better than the kings of the 1600s and the 1700s. That's for sure. And this is a truth that's kind of missed on the population because of this abundance. So, such a culture is living on the fumes of earlier sacrifices. Its people become less and less willing to make such sacrifices. Ideals diminish in importance, and abundance weighs down the souls of the citizens. The sacrifices, discipline, and virtues responsible for the thriving of the civilization are increasingly remote from the collective conscience. The enjoyment of their fruits becomes the focus. That is really indicative of the world, I would say, that we've come out of. I mean, I think the 70s and the 80s and the 90s were definitely characteristic of what that just said there. It was all about the enjoyment. And now you see on social media and things like this, people trying to make their experiences so awesome and try to make it like they're living like this all the time. And that's another false front. It's not how it is, but it's got other people thinking that that's how it is, and they should be living that way too. And so they're all trying to chase these false flags.
Steve Jobs was, before he died, he had cancer. I think he had it for 4 years. But he, in some of the internet stuff, he was saying, I have a car that's worth, $250,000, and another guy has a $1,000 car, but we get to the same place on about the same. So he was basically almost kind of confessing that all of these material things have been such a distraction, and they shouldn't have been. That his life, to have valued his life without these distractions of material, sounds like he had a greater preference for that.
These were little golden calves that they were all buying for themselves to celebrate their success.
Right.
And to show that I have the success, I can have this. Rather than appreciate it, that's really cool you built that, but good luck with it. Hop back in my pickup truck and head back home. I built cars and things like that, but they were just a project. It's cool to do it, and you're successful when you do it, and somebody else buys it, but I'm not living for that. Right. I never did. Yeah. So the enjoyment of the fruits becomes the focus. So they've become, they're kind of like idolizing their possessions. They become a slave to these things. So from abundance that we've been in now we become complacent. To be complacent means to be self-satisfied and increasingly unaware of serious trends that undermine health and the ability to thrive. Everything looks fine, so it must be fine. Yet foundations, resources, infrastructures, and necessary virtues are all crumbling all around them. As virtues, disciplines, and ideals become ever more remote, those who raise alarms are labeled by the complacent as killjoys and considered extreme, harsh, or judgmental. Do you feel extreme, harsh, or judgmental in this moment?
Me right now?
Yeah, I'm saying, because
I don't, I get,
we haven't been called killjoys, but we've been called other things so far.
what I find, Larry, is that most people don't want to either talk to you or maybe you'll text them something and they don't get back to you. It's almost as though they don't like that you pose, even if you pose a certain question about something and ask for dialogue, they don't even want to do that.
They don't want to look in the mirror because they've been
all.
looking in these funhouse mirrors all this time that gives them a distorted view of who they are and what they're being.
Yeah.
And when you show them a straight mirror, they don't want to look at it because it causes fear and
They won't talk to you. They won't.
because you make them feel bad about themselves because you made them think.
So we're all on the same team, folks. It's
We're trying to help.
Yeah.
And so if people don't want to listen, you can go ahead and turn out. But I think this is well worth listening to because it's correct. And these are cycles that have repeated. So
this is something that's been established for societies and nations way back when. This has been a cycle.
going back to BC, how all civilizations have risen up and then how
And
they've all
collapsed,
fallen.
okay.
The Roman Empire, same thing.
Wow.
The fall of the Roman Empire became because of their abundance and their complacency, and
Decadence,
they became
abundance,
apathetic.
luxury, pleasure-seeking, right.
And then here came the Mongols.
Disruption of the family. Oh, no, they desecrated it, most of it. There was some.
Well, they got defeated by a Mongol army who was feeling courageous. Okay? And so when one civilization was coming up through, the other one was declining, it got absorbed or taken over by the other invaders, and their civilization is rising up, and then they end up falling then too in time.
At the end of the Roman Empire.
Right. So now we're in this complacency, and people are saying, there's nothing wrong, everything's cool, what's your problem, dude? Settle down. That type of stuff.
So you're saying a lot of people just oblivious that there's a cancer?
Yeah, because it's not. They don't see it as affecting them because they're too ignorant. In the polite word, they don't know, and so they're not acting on it because they think everything's fine. Because what's your problem? I got a full refrigerator. I got a nice car. I got these other things. Dude, be quiet. You're making me feel bad. And I don't like that. And so this.
So the message, if you don't like the message, get rid of the message.
Yeah, the kids used to say, "Hey man, you're harshing my buzz."
Is that what they say?
Yeah, you're bumming me out. And
Too much information.
yeah, hey man,
What are you talking
everything
about?
was cool till you came in and started talking.
Yeah.
So now we got complacency, and then from complacency we build apathy. And the word apathy comes from the Greek, and it refers to a lack of interest in or passion for the things that once animated and inspired. So this kind of makes me think about when the kid comes home from college and the mom and dad said, "What happened to you? You used to be so excited about your guitar and playing and stuff like that." "No, Mom, I ain't doing that anymore, man. I'm into, cars and chicks or whatever now. I'm not
Sure.
guitars, piano, that's for, somebody else. I'm not into that anymore." So they can't understand how motivations and inspirations have changed or been just diminished. So that's apathy. Due to the complacency of the previous stage, the growing lack of attention to disturbing trends advances to outright dismissal. And so you become so complacent about things that you just say, "Nah, that doesn't matter. Throw it away. I don't need it anymore. Kick it to the curb." And so this is your throwaway society. Your, this culture of buying and then dumping stuff once you're done with it. Single-use items, things like that, one and done. Many seldom think or care about the sacrifices of previous generations, and they lose a sense that they must work for and contribute to the common good. Civilization suffers the serious blow of being replaced by personalization and privatization in growing degrees. The me generation. It's about me. Look at me. Look what I did. Look at my Facebook page.
You know, it's just
Look how great I'm doing.
I just had a thought as you were talking about there was a certain period in contemporary in the United States where I believe it was President Obama was reclassifying General Washington and trying to make him unimportant in the establishment of this nation. That they didn't. Do you remember that where they were?
Well, it's part of the process of trying to devalue and eliminate
the
past.
ones that sacrificed.
Right, because it's about me.
It's the same thing they did with the generals and stuff of the Confederacy. They're part of our tapestry. You don't take down their statues. It was a fight. Their blood was spilled.
The generals in the North and the generals in the South were all classmates.
There you go.
And they all had respect for each other for the most part, except for the dingleheads.
They wanted to dismantle on both sides with the blood that was spilled to try to preserve the Union. I mean, it wasn't, the good guys weren't all necessarily in the Union and the bad guys were in the South. They had some legitimate concerns.
Yeah, their economic structures were being concerned to them, and so their families were being threatened by these things. So they were all fighting for different things. It wasn't just about the slavery.
No.
But that was a big part of it.
Slavery was on its way out.
Well, but it was because France and England had already abolished it. And the United States was the third major.
And machinery was starting to come in to replace cotton.
Right, Eli Whitney came up with the cotton gin and things like that. So that was very transformative.
But at any rate, this whole idea that you don't recognize the suffering that went on to make this nation.
Right.
John Knoll didn't always have luxuries surrounding him. He used to ride a horse in order to say mass in remote parts of.
Yeah, because they didn't have cars yet.
Yeah, so I mean, here's again the suffering and all the rest of it that goes along with. But just to your point was that nobody is interested in the sacrifice.
Because it bums them out. Because they're in this hedonistic, I got mine.
Pursuit of pleasure.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
Dude, just go away, man. You're bothering me. You're bumming me out. So you get that kind of thing, and they say, no, you got to shut up. And they want to stop you from talking about things. And they say, you got to be quiet. You can't say that. And we see this not just in the streets, but you'll see it all throughout our other areas of culture, whether it be music, arts,
sure, it's
our religion.
Sure, yeah.
Anyone comes up with anything to talk about a problem, they're told to sit down and shut up.
Yeah,
we don't need your help.
You're
You're causing a problem, or calumny, as they want to call it in the church situations, that you're causing calumny. But a lot of times, all these people are seeking is justice or some sort of response and somebody being accountable for when somebody's been hurt.
Yeah, that's right. And solve the problem so that other people will not have to engage.
Right, eliminate the problem. See the problem, fix the problem, make sure it doesn't happen again. Police the problem. So here we have these people becoming the me type of generation, so that the working and sacrificing for the others becomes more remote. Growing numbers become increasingly willing to live on the carcass of previous sacrifices. I don't have to work for this. Somebody already did it. And I think I get a kick out of a lot of times people say, well, Jesus died for my sins. I'm saved. Well, you're sinning right now. Well, Jesus took care of that. But you keep doing the same.
The luxury of the suffering of Christ without pitching in anything.
Well, they think it's a complete indemnification of all of their bad actions. And I said, no, you're missing the point. Jesus said, go and sin no more. He didn't say, hey, I got this one covered, keep going. He said, go and sin no more. That's what he told the adulterous woman. He should have said, where's the guy? But they didn't put that in the scripture. So they park on someone else's dime, but will not fill the parking meter themselves. They don't want to pay as they go. They want somebody else that's already paid the bill, and they think they got a free ride. Hard work and self-discipline continue to erode. So they don't value these things, as a culture and a civilization, and it becomes infectious throughout all of the mainstream. You'll still have some people in the outlier areas that aren't affected by this because they've got a stronger sense of who they are and are still, patriotic in these things. They still remember these things because these are things that are taught to them by their parents and by their community at large that they remain in. But if you get out into more of a secular review of things in this world, the main driver there is to forget about the past. We're looking at the future, type of stuff. It doesn't matter what happened in the past. It doesn't affect you at all. But it did. It's what got you here. It's how you got your cell phones. It's how you got your cars. It's how you got your highways. All these things that came about. So now we're into apathy. Like, who cares? I got mine. Let's go party, dude. So this kind of type of deal. I'm going to go out and buy a dress, and you're going to take me out to dinner, type of thing. Money's no problem. So from apathy, we become dependent. So this is stage number 7. So from apathy to dependence. Increasing numbers of people lack the virtues and zeal necessary to work and contribute. The suffering and sacrifices that built the culture are now a distant memory. As discipline and work increasingly seem too hard, dependence grows. The collective culture now tips in the direction of dependence. Suffering of any sort seems intolerable, but virtue is not seen as a solution. Having lived on the sacrifices of others for years, the civilization now insists that others must solve their woes. I found that kind of funny when I heard one of the Congress women saying, "Who's going to pick our vegetables? Who's going to clean our toilets?" I just found that to be one of the most bombastic, idiotic.
Traditionally the farm workers were the ones that would pick the vegetables. They'd come over during the picking season, and they would go back and have their money. But she's kind of referring to the United Farm Workers, Cesar Chavez, the locals and the Americans and stuff. That most people didn't want to pick vegetables. But what was her comment?
She was talking about the migrants, the illegals coming.
No, the illegals aren't the ones that are picking.
The illegals, 99% of them are sitting in the city, sitting in a hotel, burning your cash. Maybe 1% of it ever saw a pickle or an avocado.
Right. The migrant farm workers are that pick vegetables and stuff have green cards, and they've been coming for years in families, so that you don't depend on the flooding of
the borders with all types of everybody. They're not farm workers coming in. No. They are not even skilled workers for the most part. They're
that's right.
They're people who are playing this card of I've got to flee. The gangs and stuff like that. Well, you got to flee the gangs in your country because you're a gang member of the opposite side.
Yeah, and they're all coming in here. It's upside down. Normally in order to breach a border, you have to have like General Rommel with Panzer divisions get by General Patton with the Third Army. Once you beat the Third Army, then you can flood into the country. This is a case where you actually had negligence, and they wanted these people to come in. And normally you got to have a war to come into somebody's country.
Well, wars are a great time of population movement around the globe. Yeah. It always happens, and that's one of the times when there's great migrations of people is during a war effort going on. So we're heading back to dependence. This ushers in a growing demands for government collective solutions.
Sure.
Because this in turn deepens the dependence as solutions move from personal virtue. You're responsible for working and driving your family's, economy and, putting food on the table. This moves from personal virtue and local family-based sacrifices to centralized ones.
Yeah.
So the family becomes now less important and instrumental in your daily life.
Sure.
And now it's the government that is your sponsor and your feedback type of thing.
Sure. When Russia collapsed and under communism, they lost their pensions and everything. But they had to collapse because the government couldn't even keep up with it. So, I mean, if you're looking at dependence and for some kind of a government to sustain. They're not going to sustain us very long.
Well, our government, our country is, depending on who you talk to, is 2 to 3 years away from complete collapse that way too.
Okay.
And that's why it's so important to stop the bleeding
And
of
reverse
this
it.
crazy money going out the door right now for, just idiotic things.
Yeah, like paying billions of dollars to Catholic charities to take people coming across the border illegally.
Yeah, to go fill the buses, fill the planes, bring
What
them
is
in,
that about?
and then spend the money over on this side then with your industrial buildup of all these employees and all like that you brought on.
So-
And now they're crying because they don't have the money because they got cut off. And that's why there's been the plea at all the pulpits across the country for us the last month or
Money,
so
money,
to be giving money
money,
for
right.
Catholic charities. The Catholic charities does good work, and I used to be a large, I was a fundraiser for Catholic charities. I would do auctions, but at that time, the focus was we were feeding people, and I can get behind that. If somebody's hungry, they can't be helped. They're not in a position to be helped because they're too hungry.
That's right.
You got to feed them, and then you can work with them. But it's all changed now. It became a dynamic of the government, and we'll talk about that in another episode again too. But it's not a good thing. I know a lot of people think it's a great thing, but this leads to this centralized dependence that we're talking about here, and this is what destroys your nation. If we destroy the nation, we've got nothing to work with, and we got nothing to continue working to try to help the next guy because we killed the baby, so to speak. Killed the host. And any good parasite knows that you only suck enough blood to feed on and don't.
And then you're
Otherwise, you
gonna
got
die after
nothing to eat
that,
on.
right? Then you
Right.
die, right?
So now we're into dependence. And what happens after dependence? Bondage. So after dependence, we return back to a state of bondage. And here's how Tyler and Monsignor Pope talk about this. He says, as dependence increases, so does centralized power. Dependent people tend to become increasingly dysfunctional and desperate. Seeking a savior, they look to strong central leadership instead of their Lord and Savior. They're looking to the God that has become now out of this government, the government God, rather than the eternal God. So they're looking to strong central leadership to help them. But as we know, centralized power corrupts and tends to usher in increasing intrusion by centralized power. So centralized power corrupts and begets more centralized power. And injustice and intrusion multiplies. But those in bondage know of no other solutions. What am I going to do? What can I do? What's the point? Family and personal virtue, essential ingredients for any civilization, are now effectively replaced by an increasingly dark and despotic centralized control, hungry for more and more power. In this way, the civilization is gradually ended because people in bondage no longer have the virtues necessary to fight. Lay down and die and do what the state tells you to. Otherwise, you don't eat. And that's where it's coming to. Or you can't speak. Or you can't, get the medical treatment that you need because you don't qualify.
Joseph Torelius said that when he was he was a dissident, in the Ukraine, and the Russians put him in gulags. He said that he prayed a lot because what else could I do?
Mm-hmm.
He was bondage and isolated. Can you imagine being isolated for 26 years?
Well, the guards weren't giving him relief, and the guy in the next cell wasn't giving him any relief.
He said the only time he goes, some of the guards would begin to relate to them, and they would say to him, Joseph, you're in bondage, but we're in bondage with you because we're in this.
Yeah, we got nowhere to go either.
We got nowhere to go. And he goes, a lot of them would convert to Christianity,
And the reason was,
because they were in bondage from their own nation. They couldn't think freely, speak
and they weren't
freely.
finding peace in their own lives,
they
but
weren't-
they
that's
saw
right.
they saw Joseph
Yeah.
having this sense of peace and interior wisdom.
That's right.
That they saw.
Sure.
And that's why it's so attractive to people when you know who you are and you're confident in that. That's one of the most attractive things in human experiences is when you come across somebody who's ultimately confident of who they are and knows where they're going. when somebody who doesn't know and is looking for direction, they say, well, this person looks like they really got it together. I'm going to see where they take me. And that's the attractiveness of strength.
You know, Larry, he said that he had more conversions when he was in jail than when he came to America. People responded to him a lot in the same way.
Yeah, well, the sheriff...
They're not interested in his storyline.
Right.
Because they're fat and happy.
Right. And they're complacent. They say, what's your problem?
Yeah,
because they're not honoring the experience. So I had the same talk. Sometimes I'll meet with our county sheriff, a good friend, a Catholic guy. I'll just leave it at that. He doesn't always attend, but he's a good guy. But we were talking about that aspect. You talk about Joseph having more conversions when he was in the jail. And I said, how's your chaplain there at the jail? He says, oh, busy. He says every guy in the jail knows where Jesus is at. He's right there with them, in the jail. He says, but the only problem is when we let him out, they always leave Jesus behind.
In the jail.
They don't take Jesus with them. So he says, if everyone finds Jesus, he's in the jail. Everyone will point to where Jesus is because he's right next to whoever's in the jail. He says, but as soon as they leave, they don't take Jesus with them, and we're bringing him back in 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
He says, if they only could, keep Jesus with them.
Well, Albert Speer, when he was in prison, he said initially he was wrestling with this idea that he was part of the German machinery in the Holocaust, and he had a conscience enough he was struggling with it. And then he would meet with, I think, a Protestant pastor, and he was searching for, he had a 20-year sentence in Standout prison after he was convicted, but he said, I hope I can take this with me when I leave, that I would have that same desire for the spiritual. And he sensed that he doubted because he was a part of whatever that structure was. So he was struggling with the idea of what your friend, your sheriff, talked about leaving Jesus behind.
Yeah. And I had a guy who had worked for me for a long time, good enough guy, but he got popped on a DUI. We were working on that issue with him. He's out now. But while I was talking with him when he was incarcerated, for 6 months, I said, so what's your plan when you get out? He says, oh, I'm going to be a street preacher.
Jeez, Larry.
I'm thinking to myself,
I'm just trying to help out a little bit.
I know. It's like, oh, okay. I'm going to be a street preacher. I said, well, you better find a bigger town than this one because,
in Rome City.
Yeah.
Jeez.
I said, no. I said, I think you better find a bigger city if you're going to do that because you're not going to have much of an audience here in Rome City. But he's out now, and he forgot all about that plan.
Did he?
Yeah. So, but he's on a path to doing better now. But I have to check in with him every now and he checks in with me just to kind of check the temperature and make sure he's not, falling off his wagon.
Case in point, when you're in bondage, when you're in jail, there's a lot of time on your hands. You'd be in the search for something that's a little more meaningful. And I can see that in my own life. You know what I mean? You fall, you stumble, you ask for forgiveness. 2-3 weeks down the road, you're back looking in the wrong places again. I mean, the human nature.
Well, it's an addictive kind of lifestyle.
Right.
They get addicted to these things, and they're not ready to work for it, not ready to complicate their lives with this discipline that comes forward. And this is what I've been saying all along, is that you have to know who you are, you have to be disciplined in that. That's the way through this. Now, as we've kind of laid out what the 8 stages are of this and how you cycle through, and these have been repeated throughout history. Okay, so this isn't just a priest talking about this. This is a scholar at a major university.
It's a template that what has happened over and over again, a cycle that continually happens. It's not.
And this is what I say. Humans are not that different from our predecessors. It's just our situations and our choices have changed over the centuries. But we pretty much respond in the same way that our forefathers did, or even people in Jesus' time and before that responded. They had a shorter window too because they didn't live as long.
Right.
So there wasn't as many long-term complications, but they were still how the choices made by the individuals in the collective led to not only the rise up when they were being disciplined and thankful in their response. They created things. That's the God element. God creates, God builds, God,
Right.
you can't build down, you can only build up. God does that. The devil tries to destroy things. And so what happens is God influence gets so many things built up, in comes the devil influence and gets pervasive amongst the community, and then all of a sudden these drives down these tendencies towards idolatry, love of their cell phone. You want to see somebody freak out, okay? See if somebody loses their kid in a Walmart, okay, with a mom, and see what happens if she loses her kid, how frenetic she gets. See a teenager lose their cell phone in a Walmart. They both freak out just the same.
Do they?
Oh my gosh. You want to see somebody lose it? Take away their cell
So
phone.
what is it with the cell phone that is so attractive to human beings?
Well, it's their connectivity. It's what makes them what they feel a part of something or knowing what's going on. It's their vanity case that lets them know if somebody's read their texts or, if they got likes on something. That's how they regard
It
themselves.
replaces a real relationship, really.
And this is what I'm getting at, is that right now in this world, this day and age, people are more lonely than they've ever been at any time in
With
human
those
existence
things.
because of these.
Oh, because of that.
Right. Because there's a lot of false fronts that come out through this, because there's no real fact checker in the immediacy of these things. So people can put out a story that's complete BS, but it gets a lot of likes, and no one's going to check them because isn't this fun?
Right.
Oh, look how cool they are.
I've
So
seen that today.
people are feeling more and more isolated than ever before. And so this complicates those other 8 stages. So where those other 8 stages were happening without the benefit of immediate communication and access to thoughts and ideas, you're going, whether they're correct or not. So by adding that accelerant factor into this, these 8 stages move much more quickly. You see what I'm saying?
So that can be a good device if used in the right way.
As is anything. Medications. Enough medication is good for you. Too much of it is bad. Like anything.
So that might accelerate a healing process too if you're in a stage of
If you can get the right messages
bondage,
into it, and you
right?
can get the agreement in the public, in the civilization, to agree to these things that, hey, and the only thing that really kind of comes along and makes things like that change dynamically, historically, has been a war and a common threat from an
sure
invasion.
that you're on the line of life and death
But
for civilization.
with all this isolation that we're having at this point now, is our response going to be what historically has happened in years before?
Which is
The rising up to fight.
okay.
Are people going to rise up to fight this
Okay.
time, or is a complicated message that's going to come through to knock that idea down, that call to help, and say, no, you don't need to do any of that. It's all lies.
Go quietly.
Yeah, don't worry about that. They ain't going to do anything. They won't do anything. It's like when Biden told Russia that a minor incursion would be okay. But he didn't discuss what a minor incursion might be for Putin to go into Ukraine. And so Putin goes into Ukraine and says, well, I'm going to take this third because historically these people are more Russian than they are Ukrainian anyway.
Yeah.
And if you ask the people on the eastern side of Ukraine where they want to be, most of them are predominantly Russian to begin with.
So they say with Russia.
Well, their family's right there.
Okay.
Their family isn't to the west, their family's to the east. And so their allegiances go that way more, but they had a label on them of being Ukrainian.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
So it's not that complicated. We make it complicated with our news stories and the bending of the truths in these things. There's a solution in there somewhere, but it's going to take somebody coming in from outside of the angle to help put this together. And that's why I think that somebody with the kind of thinking and the creative thinking of the Trump team could kind of come in and look at this and say, you're never going to stop this age-old problem, of cultures clashing and things like that. Wars settle those things, but that just puts things under the surface. It ends up coming back up later on because these things repeat. You follow me with that?
No.
And so you're never going to put it away until you get cohesive agreement in principle by all the parties. And everyone agrees, yeah, this is good.
It's going to sustain itself.
This is good. I feel good about this.
There was one thing about Trump that he talked to the president of Mexico. He asked her, I'm sure you're aware of the story, he asked her, is Mexico a drug-consuming nation? She said no. And then he asked her why, and she said, well, because of the family. And Trump said, we have good families too here, but we have a consumption going on. And she said, what else do you do? And she said, we advertise. And did you hear this story?
Mm-mm.
And Trump said, what do you mean by advertise? So we actually show what somebody looks like before they start using the
Yeah.
drugs, and then a couple of years later, with their teeth missing and their hair
Right.
gone, and
Human skeletons.
actually show that stuff.
Yeah, we've got them right here in town. You'll see people in the grocery store.
Is that right here in
6 months?
in-
Oh, yeah, we got a really bad
in
drug
Rome
problem.
City.
Oh, it's one of the worst methamphetamine problems in the state.
So Trump is number one asking questions,
Right.
and this president from Mexico said, we advertise, and Trump said, geez, maybe we need to really get on top of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And education and showing this is what you look like, boys and girls, when you
Right.
whatever you do, right?
Right, because the schools and the coaches aren't doing it.
Why?
They're saying, don't do it, but then they don't go any further with it.
That's it.
They don't say why. Because the first thing a kid asks when you tell them not to do something, they say, why?
So a coach would really have a great effect if they would take it to the next 2 or 3 steps,
Yeah, like I did.
which is what you wanted to do to begin with when you were doing
And it was what I did do.
right? Remember with the kids, you
Yeah.
wanted to do
Part
soccer?
of the agreement I had for teams coming in to participate on the fields and to stay at our facility was I got to talk to all the kids as a group to give my own presentation.
Yeah, that makes sense now.
Yeah, and it was an opportunity for me to talk to who I thought were going to be the influencers in of their generation,
Sure.
who are the athletes, to challenge them to greatness,
Right.
not just on the field but in their lives. And I said every minute of every day, every second of every day is an opportunity to change. If you made a mistake and you feel bad about it, thank God there's another second on the clock for you to make a change.
Which was really the theme of choose the greater good.
Right. Making mistakes is okay. Making mistakes is a sign of progress. You know how many mistakes were made with sending the first rockets up in the air? You know how many blew up? But thank God they blew up in a test and not in an actual human delivery system
Yeah.
type of thing. So anyone who thinks that, if a rocket blows up or, a test goes bad or a trial of a new medicine goes bad, it's not a bad thing. It's just progress towards the ultimate solution. So take chances. Don't be afraid.
President Trump was going through some deprivation as he was being attacked in the previous 4 years and previous 8 years before he won the 2020
Oh, sure.
election.
He was totally
So
dethroned.
Wasn't that some sort of a, I don't know, it fit into one of these categories where he was, he had to have courage,
Mm-hmm.
he had to persevere,
Mm-hmm.
he had to counter lies,
Right.
a Justice Department that wanted to put him in jail,
Right.
a previous president that they broke into his home in
Right.
Florida.
Rummaged through his wife's underwear drawer.
So my question is, with that amount of pain and suffering, this man emerges almost like being, sent
Yeah.
through the fire.
Butler, Pennsylvania is when they shot him. Clipped
Yeah.
his ear. Okay,
Yeah.
act of God. I firmly believe on that. That guy went into that arena that day thinking he knew who he was. He thought for sure, I know who I am. I am Donald J. Trump, and this is what I believe in. A day or two after that, after Melania and her spiritual directors had a chance to talk with him
Yeah.
out of the public's eye,
Yes.
he had a different idea and knowledge. He didn't think he knew who he was. He knew who he was.
Okay.
And it was a different man.
He was, wasn't he?
Right. Okay, but he can't come out and say, this. He's showing it. And these deliberate actions are all coming forward. And not any of it is based in anger or resentment about people.
does- and
It's frustration.
It doesn't seem to be that the anger there or payback. He doesn't.
No. He's keeping the door open for a gracious return from these people who, want to sit there and call foul on every little thing that happens.
Oh yeah, they did.
And he's saying, I understand, but common sense dictates that that's not the way through this. It's like having a petulant child who says, but all the other kids get to go, how come I don't? Well, for one reason, I'm not going to give you money to go for an overnighter for the weekend, with somebody's parents that I don't know,
Right.
haven't met. If you want to go with them, I said, you tell her parents or whatever to call us, and we'll go to dinner.
No, absolutely.
And
that's right.
we'll get
You
to know
them.
what's
That's
going
right.
on.
Absolutely.
But a lot of that's being not
They're
done.
not using that anymore. Right.
No.
Right.
Because these things have isolated them, and they're very isolated, and they're very alone. They don't have the compunction to go out and socialize and be part of a larger network, because it's safer and easier to stay home and watch Netflix and not have to be bothered by it. They have their possessions. They become slaves.
So
They
you're
become
basically
complacent.
saying that the humanity does its best during deprivation, during
Tough
bondage.
times make tough people. And tough people survive. Hard times.
No wonder the instruction of our Lord, and especially with Saint Joseph and
Stay-
the virtue of poverty, or stay
Right.
within those realms.
Right. Stay hungry.
Yeah.
Stay hungry. Stay motivated. Nothing is a greater motivator than hunger.
Right. Rain falling on you when you're sleeping. You
Well,
want to have some shelter.
comforts. I mean, these bodily necessities, but hunger is a great motivator.
Well,
And
sure.
that's why I always say you can't start a healing process with anybody if they're hungry.
Right.
And that's why I always with Catholic Charities, I was always about
Food,
raising the
feeding
money
them,
for
if they
feeding
don't have
people.
something to eat,
Yeah, and
To go
my
to
goal
bed.
was always to buy more tractor trailers so we could fill these things with the surplus of this abundance that we could disseminate to
the
other
poor,
people.
Sure.
And so I tried to work on helping setting up these backbones, this structure
Yeah.
that we could move these food products around and not have them go to waste sitting in a parking lot waiting to get moved.
Yeah, and it worked effectively. You were able to feed a lot of people.
You can't do big work without big tools, and it was a big job.
Right.
And I was just operating up around Chicagoland area, between Chicagoland and Milwaukee, the Archdiocese of Chicago. And I was just doing my thing, and I wasn't really being known, but people knew my name. They said, we got to get a hold of Larry Young. He can help you out with that. He may know somebody. And so I was getting called on that, and that was when I had my talk then with Cardinal George when he was dying after the trial. He said, you were the auctioneer guy that helped us out a lot. I said, yes, sir. I said, I was. I said, I don't know if I'll be doing it anymore, but I was. And
He remembered you doing that.
well, he
too?
knew of the name because it was an easy name for a lot of people to remember, and I was just the auctioneer guy. But auctioneers know a lot of people.
at
They know
least-
where the bodies are buried.
But at least he acknowledged that he knew somebody was doing good in his diocese.
Well, he knew me from the fellow I went to confession to out in Mundelein at the retreat center out there, and I was always and that's where the cardinal would go for his weekend retreats and stuff like that. So and I was also then known as the Our Lady of America guy
Okay.
because they knew that I was in the trial and I'd gotten him dismissed from the trial in the named defendants.
Did
So-
he know you were the one that buffered the church from having to go to a federal court?
Well, his name, and I got 5 of them pretty much dismissed in one afternoon.
Did they know that? They know that you were
I think they
instrumental?
knew because they knew it wasn't the other guys that did it.
Okay.
But it came up after I'd had a meeting, a pretrial conference with the other side. And anyway, I challenged them. I told them, I said, you don't know what you're messing with. Oh, you think we're messing? I didn't use the word messing either. It was very French.
All right.
And I got very much in their face. They said,
Right.
you can't talk to us like that. I said, I just did. And I said, if you don't like it, you can dismiss me from this trial right now. Because this is just a taste of what you're going to get if you put me on a witness stand. Oh, you think you're all that tough? I said, oh, I'm not tough. She is. I said, you're not messing with me. You're messing with the Blessed Mother.
Good.
And I said, and she is like, I think, undefeated you know.
So,
So-
within that, go ahead. You
No, I was just going to say from what Monsignor Pope had to say, and this Alexander Tyler from the Edinburgh University, that was relayed in 1916, but that was going back over all of man's cycle throughout man's history of known activities. Now, along with that same line of thinking about the decline of nations and the 8 steps, in 1940, then Bishop John Knoll comes out with this particular book that is really, I think, the linchpin in this whole thing for the modern day, because he's talking about the decline of nations and what is the cure.
Yeah, the
for
decline
these
and the
things.
cure, and the cure apparently has to do with the restoration of morality and the things that you were outlining: courage, a spirituality replacing materialism, being dismantled in favor of morality and spiritualism. In other words, the cure is on both fronts, on the things that you outlined in terms of being dependent and then being courageous in the things, but not being distracted by material that like you've articulated, consumes our time and effort and wanting to fix the boat or whatever it is that we're going to do, when these things are really irrelevant, when we should be concentrating on the spiritual. Who are we in relationship to God and what's really going on down here, not only as a family or as an individual, collectively as a nation.
I got a quick story to wrap up. It has to do with our neighbor over here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, we live on a lake. There's a piece of property between my property and the neighboring one, and the neighbors just bought this house. And this house had an encroachment onto my property. And it's about a 20-foot encroachment that they had, but their driveway is on my property. And I had talked with them about that when they were buying the place, and I said, and their agent advised them that there was this encroachment. And they said, well, we want to get this taken care of. I said, we need to take care of it because we got to sell that piece of property. And it's hard to sell it with an encroachment. So,
Yeah, it makes sense.
well, you take care of your business. You take care of your
Sure, what are you
responsibilities.
going to be in limbo?
This is adult.
Right.
And I wasn't being a jerk. And I said, hey, I'm an auctioneer. I said, I've dealt with disputes and things like that.
Right.
Let's just
Let's
hammer
do it.
this thing out.
Right.
I said, what do you want to do to fix this? I said, I'm open to ideas. And they wanted a full long strip to buy, which was going to be 1/4 of an acre. But it was going to take up 25 to 50 feet of some of my most premium shoreline.
Yeah, that's right. And they didn't want to pay the amount for it.
Well, they thought it wasn't worth anything. And I said, well, no. I said, this land out here on
It's
the
worth it,
lakefront
sure
is
is.
going for about $150,000 an acre.
Yeah, it's worth it.
And I said, you want 1/4 of an acre? I said, the natural thing to do is I'll give it to you for 1/4 of the price of the going price.
Right.
We'll just cut you off a chunk.
Could you still build a house on that parcel, even though they were to have that other? If
Well,
you were to
the
sell the
other
land,
25 feet would have fixed their encroachment, and then with the rest of the land, anyone could still build a house.
Okay,
I mean,
all right. So
it wasn't going to
everybody
affect
comes
that.
out ahead. Right.
Well, they would have been okay.
All right.
It would have been different, but it would have been okay. And so I said, well, that should probably be about $40,000. And they go, oh, there's no way. That land's not worth that. We're not paying that. And I said, well, what do you think it's worth? They said, well, maybe 5.
1,000?
Yeah.
Oh,
I go, whew. I said, that wouldn't even pay basically for the surveying and the legal work.
Jesus. Yeah.
I said, so these people didn't know what they were talking about, and they were trying to push me around. And I just said, no. I said, that's not going to work. I said, we're going to have to settle this another way. And I got a way with the attorneys figured out. But when I came back with another alternative, I said, well, we can change the lines. You won't have the lake frontage, but we'll give you a couple of lines and we'll cut out this area where the encroachments happen. It'll be it won't be a straight property line, but at least it'll fix your problem. It'll fix their home, which is, even their deck is on my property.
The
So,
deck is on the farm?
well, half of their deck is on my
I thought
property.
they're supposed to survey before they build in this.
It was back when the people who built the house owned this land then too, so they didn't care. They never fixed
okay.
it.
All right.
They were complacent
I see.
and,
Okay, all right.
fat and happy. Oh, don't worry about it. What's your problem?
Right.
But anyway, so I offered him a solution that was going to be more budget friendly. And he says, well, we can't do anything. I said, well, why not? He says, well, we had to buy a boat. I said, wait a minute, you had to buy a boat? He says, yeah, we got a lake house now. We had to buy a boat. He said, so now we don't have any money.
He's goofy.
Well, no, he's indoctrinated into the system. Okay, so he's in this.
Me.
He's in this me, the possessions and all like this, rather than taking care of his business and then making for good relationships. He goes into this, and so we've got people coming out and buyers coming out looking at the property and walking it, and it gets confusing because the property line looks a little concerning to them. So
I see where you got welcome parking or something.
right. So because I'm trying to bring people in, get them off the road because people are complaining about that, but people are coming out walking and they're kind of scratching their heads at these survey lines because it's not making a lot of sense. Well, this guy's driveway, so I have to tell them what's going on.
Jeez.
Well, the other morning, the sheriff's deputy was out front. He came to my door, at 8:30 in the morning, telling me to stay off their property. And I said, their property? What do you mean their property? He says, well, they said you've been encroaching on their property and trespassing. I said, I haven't been trespassing. I said, I haven't even been out there for 10 days. I said, what are you talking about? And he goes, well, people are out there walking around, walking on their property. And I said, well, dare to differ. I said, there might be people looking at the property, but it's not me. And I said, here, come with me, walk with me. Let's go take a look at this so you know what's happening in case they bring this up again. So I showed the sheriff's deputy the property lines and what's going on and what I'm trying to fix. The last thing I want is a fight.
Really?
I mean, this is a first world problem, folks. Let's take care of this. So I go and I showed the sheriff's deputy. I said, this is what they're going. He goes, well, their driveway's on your property. I said, yeah, and half the deck is too. He says, well, they got a problem. And I said, yeah, but they're trying to put it on me.
Wow.
He says, oh, so they're trying to make you the bad guy. I said, yeah, I haven't even been out here for 10 days.
Right.
I said, that's other buyers coming out, people looking at the property, walking along, they get confused because all of a sudden here's this driveway. But they're not, but their house is like this far from the property line. I kid you not.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to help them fix it.
They don't want to do it.
Well, they think that they're just going to be able to take it, and if they tell me to shut up and pound sand, that they can just beat me down with it.
So what do you have to do? You have to go to court, or how do you have to?
I'll end up having to go to court unless they come around. But one of the other thoughts is I'll just put a storage shed out there on where this driveway is. I'll use their driveway as my foundation. I'll put a storage shed on it.
Where they have the concrete?
Mm-hmm. I'll just put a storage shed on it, and I'll paint it pink. Like a little baby's
something
playhouse.
to come to the table, right?
Well, they have to look out their beautiful brown home locked in the woods with this highly visible. Maybe I'll do a variety of colors.
Sure, you could do the rainbow. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, I could just kind of shoot little.
Oh, they'll love that. Yeah.
Shoot little. What do they call those? Unicorn farts.
$40,000 would have settled the event for them.
And my last opportunity for him was like $15,000. I said, we'll just cut this out, and half of that had to go to the surveying costs and legal costs.
So you were willing to allow them to be with.
I was trying to help them.
And they can't see it.
No, they had to buy a boat.
So this is that me.
Right. And so I thought, okay.
So
and
they
then
haven't got a clue what you're talking about.
And then they throw this complaint on me to trespass me. So I said, well, I haven't been trespassed from the property yet because you have to have a legal direction to trespass somebody.
My God, Larry, you need another. Need another event in your life.
Well, these folks walked into it knowing exactly what the situation was, and now they don't want to deal with it because, you're the bad guy. We're the ones who are being reasonable, but they're not. And so if they go into court, they're just going to look like fools. And the
court may tell them to take down half or whatever amount of their.
Oh, they definitely will.
What is it? The outside deck.
Yeah, they'll have to be within 2 feet of the setback.
So they have to bring that deck.
Yeah, they can't just go to the property line. They got to go 2 feet inside the property line. It's an illegal deck and it's an illegal driveway. And they're trying to say, well, that's adverse possession. I said, no, you need adverse possession. It takes 10 years of occupancy. You've been in here 5 months.
Oh, is that right? So if 10 years they have no problems.
If I say nothing for 10 years to them, they can legally claim it as theirs as adverse possession.
So they had to go to a lawyer to tell them about adverse possession.
No, they just looked it up online and didn't realize that they needed 10 years of occupancy to be able to claim adverse possession.
I can't believe, geez, every time you turn around, you got
Well, part of the problem is they don't realize I've been an auctioneer for 25 years, so I dealt in these laws all the time. I was a licensed realtor.
No, you're right. You would have to deal with that stuff.
Yeah,
You're right.
so I know these things. They can ask me about in Illinois or in Indiana. I can tell you what the laws are. I can refresh myself pretty quickly. So
is it going to be resolved?
I don't know. If it's not resolved amicably, it'll be resolved by a court.
Okay.
You know, with the next sale. But you know, we dig our own graves in this world. Some of us just have a bigger shovel. You know, and we like to whip it out every now and then, and you know, think that you're digging a hole for somebody else when you actually just dug it for yourselves. So the first rule of things is to communicate, be open, don't attack on these things. But
well, for $15,000, it's going to cost me, it would cost me more money to tear down a certain portion of that deck and monkey with all the rest of the stuff. The survey, I mean, $15,000 is a nice, easy way out of it.
Oh, and it would totally destroy the layout of their home. And I don't want that.
Right.
And I told the man, I said, I want you to have a very enjoyable home here. I said, but I can't pay for your fun. You know, I can't afford to pay for your fun.
No, you're
right.
But
he wants me to pay for his boat.
Right.
You know, in this, by
sure,
lack
you
of
can tie up
regard.
some good money in a boat, can't you? So.
Oh, he'd probably put $80,000 into a boat.
Wait a minute.
You think these pontoons are cheap?
80 grand?
Some of them are 150,000.
And he can't come up with 15 grand to
so
secure his land? Oh,
so
God.
he says he had to buy a boat.
Sweet Jesus, have mercy on us.
Well, but this is kind of where we're at. So, but that's an example of how this can play itself out in the real world.
Sure, in the scenario of, community. Here's a guy disrupting community when he could be cooperative. But he's locked into...
Right, and he tried playing the Catholic card, saying, well, I thought you were a Catholic.
Is he Catholic?
No.
So, they all try to play that.
Well, what they all think, he says, I thought you were a Catholic. What he was basically saying was, I thought you were just going to lay down and let me walk on you.
He's a manipulator.
Well, but this is the thinking that a lot of people have. They say, oh, he's Catholic, he won't do anything.
Yeah.
You know, and this is kind of what's happened in the roles of our society and the patterns of our behavior. And I'm saying it's okay to be docile and to be nice in these things, but you're not necessarily needing to be taken advantage of in these things. And so this is where this corruption and this me type of stuff comes along.
Right.
And I told him, I said, I told the sheriff, I said, yeah, I'm still open to talking. I said, I have an opportunity. I've got an idea here as to how to handle this. And I tried sharing it. I went over to drop my telephone number off and an invitation to call me. I said, I think I got this figured out. Give me a holler, because I didn't have his phone number. Well, I went up and I knocked on the door. I didn't expect anyone to be home. I was just going to slip my paper inside the door, but the wife answered.
Okay.
And she says, what do you want? I said, well, I just wanted to drop my telephone number off for you guys. I said, I think I got a solution to this. You know, give me a call.
Sure.
And she says, well, I don't handle anything with it. I said, I know. Drew does. She goes, well, how do you know Drew? I said, we had a long talk the other day. So she's wanting to push buttons behind the scenes, so they're not talking to each other.
Oh, geez.
So that's one of the worst things is when the husband and wife don't talk to each other. And he keeps her in the dark, and then she gets angry because he doesn't want to piss her off by telling her what's going on. So this happens a lot in marriages and whatnot. But he played the Catholic card against me. I thought you were a Catholic. I said, yeah, I am. I said, you go to church? What church you go to up there? Because I know the area he's from, because that's where I was from. And I said, you go to St. Francis? He says, no, we're not Catholic. I'm going,
so. But he's playing the Catholic card on you.
Yeah,
yeah.
Because he's thinking, you got to lay down, mister. You're a Catholic. You're supposed to.
Turning out her cheek.
Right. Let me walk on you. Now buy my boat. So, but that's just a real-world application of that hit home. But that's how ridiculous it can get.
Yeah, it's very disruptive. I mean,
so,
anybody's life to be able to have to do that.
So we'll just have to let the courts deal with it, or maybe there could be an amicable situation, you know, or even maybe the new buyer will say, "I don't care, leave it. I don't care. I'm not going to bother with it, but I'm going to put my stuff right up against his house, you know, because he's entitled to."
Well,
I can build a structure within 3.5 feet of his outside wall.
I had a guy went into business in another restaurant, and for 5, 6 years, I never saw any return. And so I said, well, you can go ahead and buy me out, just to get a realtor, find out what the value of everything is, and whatever, split it in half, and give you my end, and you can have it. And he wouldn't respond to me, so then I had a friend that owed me something. He was like, I was second in command of Satan's escorts, and I said to him, I said,
Dude,
listen,
I don't know if I want to hear this story.
I said, I got a $100 gift certificate for everybody that's in the escorts in this part of Indiana. I want you to go to my restaurant that I have in Roanoke, and so like 10 of them went in and parked their motorcycles, and they said, we got $100 gift certificates.
Feed us.
So the guy calls me up and he says, we'll settle. We'll settle to pay you off half of whatever the place is worth, all right? Or you can feed Satan escorts.
With your rich
With your
hospital executives and stuff.
Well, I
like
mean,
that.
the point was everybody they want to settle and buy that property, but they just don't want to pay for it.
Right. They think you should just capitulate and give it to them because, well, for me, it was because I was Catholic.
Yeah, and then now he plays that. So this is cunning. This is really kind of like.
Well, I told him, I said, I'm not a good Catholic, so what do you want?
There you go. Look. Yeah. By the way, my buddy has a Saint escorts and want to go have a party.
I didn't say I was a good
I
Catholic.
use a little bit of your.
Yeah, I mean, don't sit there and pigeonhole that thing. But well, tell me more about what you found out with John Knoll and his.
Well, this is Larry. This is in 1940. Obviously, he was aware of this very, very early on as to what's going on in terms of the world and the nation. And he writes a book called The Decline of Nations, the Causes and the Cures, and this was published in 1940.
And Father Havel, who was my instructor and all, like an uncle to me, he actually worked on this project with the bishop.
It's something. Everything, often things that happened here, we're not aware. I'm not aware of it, and then it surfaces, and Larry has information about Father Havel working with.
Yeah, Father Havel had told me that he had worked on a book with the bishop, as he had been dismissed from American University early at the outset of the war, because things started getting turbulent over in Europe before the U.S. started getting involved.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So Father Havel had to flee Rome in 1939, came back, and his studies weren't completed over at American University, so he finished them under the tutelage of Bishop John Knoll.
Okay.
He was a diocesan, Father Havel was, so he was just coming back home.
Right.
And so the bishop helped him through his last classes or whatever for his training to be ordained. Then he ordained him. But as part of his work and training, he had him help him with assembling information and doing some editing on this particular book. And I didn't know exactly the name of the book.
Right.
Because there wasn't a copy available to me. But Father Havel had mentioned this, and I just kind of let in ear out the other type of stuff until we connected on this the other week, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Eureka moment, this is the book.
Yeah, and I connected, because I was looking for this book to show you for a long period of time, couldn't find it. And we had a showing up in of the Shroud of Turin in Monroeville, where some of my grandkids go to school up there. And in one of the baskets was this book, and it shouldn't have been in there. I don't know how it got in there. And so once I got the book, I said, oh, Larry would be interested in this, but I didn't know the connection.
And I'd already been researching this stuff and getting these other things. And here, it's a mirror of what's going on.
You were working on that same scenario, right? So with this, sure.
So the 1940, this was 1916. I talked about these 8 steps, the 8 stages. This was 1940, so a little more prophetic, but he was basically drilling into the same things these guys did.
Same thing.
Just
different language,
just
different
50
set
years,
of circumstances.
just 50 years earlier.
Oh, yeah.
And he kind of beat him to the punch. But, the same issues were still in play this whole time, but they hadn't been academically pursued because of people had gotten into this post-war
Sure.
World War II malaise, this
Oh, absolutely.
you
I
know,
remember
the abundance
1950,
and all
sure.
like that. All
Transistor
these,
radio. You could have a radio this size. Oh my God, that was like
Oh.
that size for $5.
instead of one this big, as big as a bookcase.
But they all used to sit next to them, didn't they?
Oh yeah,
listening
they had to
to
dial it in. So, okay, so with Noel's situation,
So-
this is what he said in 1940.
The collapse of our civilization, which is now so seriously threatened, is primarily the collapse of ideals. It's the loss of respect for Christian standards and principles. Conduct itself alike of men and of nations is secondary to the ideals by which it is motivated. Ideals come first when they are lost, therefore all is lost. To read a little bit more, and then I want to. We have taken justifiable pride in our Christian civilization, which is manifold privileges and blessings. Unquestionably, it has been and is superior to all man-made civilizations, superior in security of human rights, superior in the opportunities for self-expression, superior in the degree of happiness, and superior above all else in the purity of ideals. With Christian ideals, none other are to be compared.
This is 15, 16 years before Our Lady of America came.
Okay.
And he's-
56, that's right.
Right, so he's expressing these basic things about some things
Purity.
are absolute and stand out above our ideals and goals.
Yeah. Purity of ideals.
Right.
With Christian ideals, I mean, it's the same thing. It's just take, for example, your neighbor. Your com is a 40,000. Okay, you don't want that because you're talking about, but we can accommodate you for, would you say 16,000?
It was going to be that. We were going to slice the pie differently. So, well, you don't want the whole quarter acre.
Okay.
I'll do a
So
slice out.
This is a purity of an ideal. In other words, let's settle this and try to be right. It's going to cost you more money if you go to court between an attorney and tearing down what you have to tear. Pay the $2 for parking. Pay
Yeah.
the 16,000.
Well, I'm trying to help them through in a way. Actually, I'd be taking a little bit of a hit, but I was, the civility.
And that's good because you're practicing what you're preaching in terms of our Lord is calling us to purity. Well, that's the greater good, is to choose something that will accommodate your neighbor.
Right. He walked into it knowingly, but he just didn't want to pay the pain.
$2.
He didn't want to go through the pain, the suffering.
But he would go through the pain of suffering if you pay for his boat or a certain portion of his boat.
Right.
So again, the idea of the collapse of a nation isn't a matter of just like Hitler rises or Stalin rises. They're like building blocks of people presenting this craziness of being not a good neighbor and manipulating your neighbor, and a neighbor that wants to help satisfy the situation so that everybody comes out on top. They refuse to do that. So well, how does that impact? Well, it does. Everything we do impacts what's happening on the planet. I mean, after all, the Holy Family, how did they impact salvation? Through prayer, through work, through kindness, through people that attacked them. Mm-hmm. Blessed Mother would explain to them. They talked by the time they got done. But the resilience of not wanting to settle a problem where they could come out on top is crazy. They're actually working against themselves. But again, yes, he was prophetic in what was you talked about in terms of 1960. So, history repeats itself.
Yeah, so these folks are talking about things more of a secular view of things that he's going more into it, the need for
Morality,
spirituality and
Christianity.
and right.
He was saying that anything that has, and you said that too in this thing, that the guy talks about Christianity being the basis of the progression of societies and stuff. Not that we haven't had our problems in the Catholic Church and haven't had to correct these things.
Yeah.
But basically that Christian Christ, the underpinning of his church, has brought forward a civilization that has been profited, and the people have profited by it. However, when we do profit from it and we do have abundance, we begin. That's the collapse.
Right.
This is crazy. It's almost
You,
like
you start giving up on the spirituality. You stop going to church. You stop giving praise to your Maker, or having any kind of acclaim for somebody or a greater being having helped you in getting to where you are.
Sure,
You say, "I did this."
That's right.
And it becomes the model of the individual, and that's what we're having with all these Facebook type people and these vanity type projects that are going on.
Absolutely.
And they're
I did it. Yeah.
yeah.
We did this for you, Lord.
Right.
I'll let you know what you owe me. For you, free of charge.
Yeah. At least, except for this part, I got to charge you for that. You know. So he has these concerns in 1940, and I know we're shooting over a lot of this stuff, but it's kind of redundant to what these guys had said, but he's saying it in a different way.
Yeah, and he goes
From a different focal point.
Father Noel goes into the players, the different people. I mean, he was brilliant in knowing the politicians in the United States and in Germany, in Italy. He was very, very aware of who the players were at this critical time, just before the United States enters into World War II. Mm-hmm. But they were aware of this. I mean, Pius X was aware of this in 1910. I mean, they knew that.
Right, and so was Noel, because he started complaining and raising the alarms in 1915. You know, when he had started the Sunday Visitor, because he was talking
1915.
Because he was talking about the takeover of the Gary school system to do the pilot project.
Yeah, tell him about that.
Well, the 1915, 1916. The U.S. government came into Gary, Indiana, and took over the public school system to do a pilot project to remove God and the influence of family and mom and dad from the curriculum.
Oy.
And these are the things they talk about in here, where the regard for family, you know, that basis of, you know, love of family is why we fight,
Right.
you know, to protect our family. When that gets taken away, and it's a state, you know, will the people
We'll
fight
fill
anymore?
that vacuum,
They
yeah.
won't fight anymore.
Right.
Because they're not feeling that, because they're isolated. And so they don't have anyone, they don't feel like I'm obligated to fight for anybody. You know, mom and country. You know, it's like
Or their friends.
they don't
Right.
have friends.
I've been-
They have acquaintances.
Well, that may be true, but I know that, you know, when I get rejected, you get rejected. The funny way you get rejected, they simply don't talk to you. They
Sure.
don't respond to you.
We
Then
call
they
that-
want to have a conversation with you. It's like,
That's called ghosting.
yeah, and these are people purported to be, you know, Christian and to be Catholic and to be, they didn't give a shit about you. So, you know, I'm just talking to you.
Well, they're insecure in their own right because they don't know who they are, because they're waiting for instruction from their
Who?
higher up next.
That don't know who they are
Well,
either.
they're right. And so you get into this
Wow.
whirlpool, cesspool
Yeah.
of non-tethered people and thinking, and that's it ends up with these, you know, crazy colors going everywhere.
Right.
But they're not understanding who they are and what they're about and what they're willing to fight for. They want to bitch and moan about a lot of things, but they're not ready to get down and do the dirty work to try to fix things, because they think that everyone else needs to bend to them.
Okay.
And this is the part, this is where it's a little bit different in today's society, because our war that we're fighting right now is not a conventional war. It's a war right now of ideologies.
Yeah, you're right.
And suspended, what I would say, adulthood. You know, not being adults.
That might be even more of a war of ideology than an actual physical war.
Mm-hmm.
We may have greater repercussions from ideological.
Of course.
You think?
Sure, that's one of the fastest ways to corrupt a society.
Through ideas
Right.
and ideals.
Right.
And if Christ isn't a part of your
Yeah,
ideal,
music and culture can change things very, very quickly. A hit song
right?
with a
No,
hot
sure.
hook
Yeah, sure.
will change things very, very quickly.
Right.
You know, even a slogan, a jargon, anything, a
Black
catchphrase.
Lives Matter.
Let's go, Brandon. You know,
Right.
it changed the discussions very, very quickly. An accidental mistake on cue
That's
on national
interesting.
TV.
So there is power in
Words
in
matter.
Yeah.
Words matter.
Well, there is hope.
Yeah.
Can I read a little bit more here?
Yeah, please.
this is in the conclusion, he says, the world today needs expert guidance, is recognized by everybody, the politicians, economists, sociologists, dictators, congresses, parliaments, world courts, kings, presidents have all proven their incompetence to provide the guidance.
He was being kind.
And it's recognized by everybody.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is what it says. It's required. It required an alliance with Hitler and the invasion of Poland, and later the invasion of Finland by the Soviet Russians, to direct the attention of the American people to the real spirit of Bolshevism. So that Hitler united with Russia, which he hated Russia and wanted to get rid of communism, but he united with them to go into Poland. And he said, this is when the American people woke up, that now you've got two evil forces that have joined forces to go into Poland.
And all of a sudden, that Atlantic Ocean didn't seem so wide anymore.
Yeah.
And they started waking up a little bit, and they started they started out saying it doesn't matter to us. This is their problem.
Right.
Okay, until they came westward a little bit, and then all of a sudden it's like, oops, that's pretty close to France. That's pretty close to
everything.
Right. All our other ports and things like that. And so they started wisening up a little bit and getting their butt cheeks started clenching a little bit more, and they started saying, hey, we got an issue here.
Right.
This guy, we all gave him a pass and thought he was just like a good guy, building his nation state up. But this guy's got an anger streak. He got a mean streak. He killing people.
Yeah. In fact, I think somebody said that. I think it was Albert Speer said that he had a great desire to promote hatred, especially with the Jews. But none of them recognized that Speer couldn't understand why I could not recognize this man as being evil. And he said part of it was because the German people, not his people, but other Germans, were starving. And they didn't have food, and they didn't have jobs. And this guy comes along,
feeds them,
and saved them, and they were drawn in by the power. And he said, literally, we got swept up into the power of it. He goes, and he said, I heard him talk about the Jews, this, that, and the other thing. He said, but Spear said, I thought he was going to let it go. They used that part of the rhetoric to come into power, but what he was saying is what he was saying. I mean, this guy was being serious as a heart attack. But again,
that's exactly what Hamas did in Palestine beginning in 2006. They came in and they took a desperate people. They took the international humanitarian money. They fed them.
Is that right?
And they said, we will protect you. And so the people said, okay.
Okay, they went along.
You feeding us? Okay, you're going to protect us? Okay. And then here's what they got. And now they're in bondage.
Oh, yeah, a nightmare. Okay.
You got these people are over there in bondage. There's a lot of nice people and they're good people, but their ideology has got them all messed up.
Right.
And their need for dependence upon the centralized government has got them dependent. They can't get out of it.
Did Hamas actually think they were going to be able to take down Israel, though? Did they think that? Did they?
Yeah, because they're Iran. They think Iran is building these bombs and going to take out Israel. I tell you, Iran is weeks, if not days, away from having enough fissile material to make 6 bombs.
Yeah, well, I don't think is that going to happen?
Who knows? I mean, even these estimates of time are just estimates.
So the idea that we could be on the doorstep of World War III is not just some kind of a flash scare.
No,
it's a reality.
It's historically cyclical from these things we just talked about. He was on the precipice of it then. What led up to that was the devaluing of other human populations or cultures, as being less than human and worthy of being eliminated. So that's the policy of the Muslims against Israel and all Christians. It's in their teaching. They says, oh, no, they're peaceful. Well, they're peaceful with each other, but they're pretty pissed off at Christians and anyone else. They're murdering them across Africa right now. And no one's talking about it.
Is that right?
I've talked about it before. I mean, when Clinton was in office, they killed, what, 6 million Rwandans? And what did the world do? Nothing.
No, you're right. That was a